an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Deadwood Season 2, Episode 8, Childish Things. In this episode, there are a couple of low-key confrontations going on in this. Most of them do seem to involve Alma, and there's a scene that I'm going to need to talk about for a while to parse what I even think happened there regarding Joni and creepy McKillerface, whom I don't want to like, and the show is somehow making him weirdly likable. I don't know how I feel about this. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha. Many thanks to Patrick for commissioning this episode. This is a pretty, this episode was oddly lighthearted in some ways, considering all of the intensity of scenes on a case-by-case basis. And that works for something that's called Childish Things. But I really was surprised at how sort of deftly a lot of things were handled without the kind of reactions or even the kind of confrontation in the first place that I had really thought was inevitable. So let's talk about this from the very beginning. The very first scene that we have is between Al and Bullock. And Al is basically like, I'm going to need you to be the face of Deadwood, because we're going to need somebody in charge that people trust, and you can tell by looking at a lot of people what they're about, but that's not true of you. And because you can't tell, and you're good looking and have a sort of gravity about you, people are going to trust you more than the average person, and you're going to be perfect for this. To which Bullock inevitably is like, no, that's not for me. I'm not interested. And Al is basically like, oh, really? You're not interested? So you want them to come in here and completely take over everything and then fuck us all right up the ass? Is that what you were excited about and you want? And finally, Seth is like, all right, I guess. And it's so Seth is so frustrating, and I feel like that's the word I use every single time I cover a scene with him, because he wants so bad to act like he's above it all, and the fact is that, Seth, you are part of this community, and as much as you may be like the sheriff, and in some ways are literally above it all in terms of how you order folks around and make the rules, you don't get to live in this pretty small community and be completely separate from it too. You can't accomplish both of those things. You can be a little bit distant from it by virtue of what you do. But if anything, when it comes down to it in situations like this, representing having a stake in Deadwood is just going to be part of being a sheriff. So it just feels like he wants to have his cake and eat it too. He wants to be able to do this job and keep this place safe and be able to have some power here because people are idiots and untrustworthy and dangerous. But he also doesn't want to be so entangled in the whole thing that his name becomes synonymous with Deadwood. And this is a problem that I think a lot of us have that are either control freaks like myself. I would say that Seth falls into the control freak category a little bit, or at least those of us who are above average in competence and intelligence. We want to not take on that kind of responsibility sometimes, but the other options are for someone else to do it badly and ruin things for everybody. So in part, I think being competent and having intelligence is sort of, that's the price that you pay for that, is that you have to take on more responsibility and maybe put yourself in a position where you're associating with people that you don't agree with or like or respect or trust. And it's like on a small scale, I've felt this way at a lot of different jobs that I've come in as an entry level, like stock person or whatever. And I turned out to be much more reliable and much more like efficient and started to get promoted. And I didn't want to be like, I appreciated the extra money, but I didn't want the extra responsibility. I didn't want to make this a career, but it was either like do worse than I know I'm capable of on purpose to avoid being noticed, or just deal with the fact that this is part of what you're going to do here and just shut the fuck up and do your job. So this scene ends with Al raising his glass and saying huzzah, and some fucking random at the bar standing up and raising his glass. I don't know why that fucking killed me, but there's a lot of like weird little moments in this episode like that are sort of throwaways and are so entertaining to me. And that moment where he stands up and raises his glass, even though he was not part of this conversation, he doesn't know what they were talking about, and the two of them turning to look at him is priceless. It's so good. So we'll see what that actually turns out to be. But, right here, we don't actually get to like in this episode, there's not any specific plan made. It's just sort of Al making sure that Seth's on board. So then we go to Francis Wolcott writing his letter, Creepy McKillerface. And he is assuring, what's his face? Heath? Is that what his name is? Let me go back here and make sure that I've got his name right. I always forget who he is. Oh yeah, he doesn't actually say like the name of the, Hearst, that's the one. He doesn't say it here, but I just remembered. He's writing this letter to let him know basically like we've got control of almost all the claims, except for the widows, which is the biggest one. So working on that next is like the subtext there. And then we get to see a pretty interesting snapshot of what's going on the claims, because they have hired a lot of workers to do the manual labor of like sifting and mining, and it's not like heavy duty mining. They're not like, tunneling in and stuff like that, but it's the surface level. And it turns out that they're interested in bringing in Chinese workers, but that the camp has so few, like, essentially what they're worried about is all of the white people in the camp basically rioting at the fact that they're being replaced by cheaper workforce. Tale as old as time. Capitalism, yay. And we get to see these workers, and most of them are Cornish. He says some are German. The modus operandi of a lot of these guys who work these claims is they'll use grease to lodge pieces of gold that they find as they're mining in their hair. And they will also lodge them up their ass, probably in their mouths as well, I would guess. But these guys, on this particular claim, are forced to shower publicly, and thus they get all of the bits of gold and everything out of their hair, off their bodies. And then there's some people that they can, like, I don't know how they catch this one guy, because there's one dude in particular that's the sort of centerpiece of this scene, who they're all like watching all of the guys who are in charge. There's a bunch of dudes in like these heavy overcoats who are wearing top hats, watching a bunch of other dudes who are stark naked shower, and they are aware because of something that this guy does. And I've watched the scene a couple times and I can't figure out what it is that tips them off, but they are aware that this guy in particular has something up his ass. They know. And they pull the guy aside and bend him over and search him. They pull out a chunk of gold, which that's some determination, man. And then this guy, rather than like deal with what's going to happen, who knows what that would have been. I don't know if they would have executed him there for stealing. I have a feeling that they would not have killed him, but they probably would have beat him really bad. And he would have lost his job, I would assume. But he decides that he's going to flee. And he runs off, and the whole thing, like, this dude is stark fucking naked. And it's really, like, refreshing to have some full frontal male nudity on this show after all this time. There's been, like, one scene, and it was weird. But yeah, this guy sprints off and gets shot and killed. So, you know, Francis is writing this letter with all of this, like, flowery sort of restrained language, but we get to see the everyday violence of working one of these claims. And, you know, one could argue that maybe it wouldn't be this violent if people didn't try to steal. But also, are they being completely exploited? Probably. I don't know what average wage was. I don't know what these people are being paid. But yeah, I'd be willing to wager that these people are not being compensated adequately for what they're doing. And they're talked about in such a way. And this is something I find, it's so weird and fascinating, but in a sort of like, in the sort of way that's like a sick fascination, if you know what I mean, where you're like, I find this, like, I can't look away. The old-fashioned racism is so specific and so, it applied to whites as well sometimes if they were from the wrong country. So Irish would always be handled a certain way in a lot of things that I've read. This, like, aversion to the Cornish is a specific thing that I have no understanding of at all. I have no, like, basis to... No base understanding of why the Cornish are looked down on the way that they are and talked about the way that they are. But apparently everybody, like, sees them as basically being, like, huge cheats. And I just, what weird specific ideas. I don't understand where this sort of shit comes from. Like, it's just, you know, the racism that we have today is plenty bad enough, and it's so much more generalized. This kind of thing is like so specific and relied so much on whether you actually heard someone speak and could detect by their accent where they were from, or whether you thought, like, by looking at them that you could tell where they were from. And that's this sort of conflation or overlap with, like, eugenics. There's just a lot of weird stuff with this that I don't really understand. But in any case, this situation is, like, obviously about 6 or 7 steps above what's going on with the Asian women who were trucked in. But it's clear that this would extend to whatever Asian workers they brought in, and it would be much more extreme and harsh, more than likely, because they are barely seen as human beings, if they are at all. It doesn't feel like they're seen as human beings by a lot of folks. So I would like for them to not bring in Chinese help, just because, 1, they're going to exploit them so horrifically. 2, I don't want to watch them exploit them. And 3, there's going to be all these people who are going to, like, be out of work, all of these white guys with all this rage who are probably going to take out their aggression on the Asian population as well. So they'll be having it from both sides. Yeah, guys, this is just a little too familiar. You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? You hear me? So yeah, that's what's going on with his letter and explaining everything. And he's sitting in the Bell Union, like, parlor writing this. And then Doc Cochran comes downstairs and talks to Cy and mentions that one of the girls is potentially has the clap. And then Doc Cochran says, so am I to understand that the new arrived Chinese whores are under your control? And Cy says, well evaluated. And he says, I'd be available to see to their care like I do these here. And Cy says, declined with thanks. And Doc Cochran, who tried to be amiable to the best of his ability, starting off with this with this proposal, I really enjoy how much Doc Cochran makes an effort to not show people how disgusted he is right out of the gate, even though it's so clear to us as an audience how fucking done he is with some of these people. But he starts to get really irritated and is like, I'm not sure you're aware, but they're fucking starving to death. So beyond any of the shit that's going on with their actual sexual health, they may just drop dead because you don't feed them. And Cy does this thing that is so manipulative and gross, where he tries to act like, well, it's not that I don't care. It's just that they come from a different culture and they handle things differently. For them, their women are disposable. And I don't subscribe to the idea that we as white men get to tell everybody what to do. Cy, don't you fucking dare try and frame this as you being open-minded and tolerant. You're allowing women to be starved to death. Get the fuck out of here. He doesn't give a shit because they are not white women and they are not his. They're under his control, but they're not his. And so he could give a shit. And that's what it is. And Doc Cochran is so ready to just pop. He's so angry. And interestingly, in the background of this scene, Francis is just watching. And this is what I mean in terms of this show, starting to make me wonder about Francis. There's so much about him that feels like a contradiction, and I'm just not sure where I stand with him, because he kills these three women, and to some degree I don't really understand why. He killed Doris, obviously, in retaliation for her going and tattling to Cy, which he then tells Cy, well, my boss already knows about what my proclivities are, so nice try. And this is in, previous episode. Cy basically low-key threatens him with blackmail. And he's just like, you've really overplayed your hand, and they already know. But then goes and kills this girl, which leads me to think maybe they don't already know. Or maybe he's just that disgusted that she is out tattling on him. But there really isn't a good reason why he has to kill everybody else. Even Doris, it's not a good reason, don't get me wrong, but it's an understandable one of his just being angry. When it comes to Maddie and what was the other girl? Carrie, I think. I don't get what was going on with that. And I just have a lot of questions with that. So the way that he watches Doc Cochran handling Cy here, there's an expression on his face almost as if he approves. Approves of Doc Cochran being angry. And, he was under Doc's care after the beating that he took, which he seems to be mostly recovered from Charlie Utter. But I can't tell exactly. His expression is closed enough that, am I imagining a flicker of approval here or what? I think that he wants Cy to be better than he is. I think that there's a weird streak of misplaced sort of chivalry that Francis has that does not align with his murderous nature, and he knows that, and he doesn't really know how to reconcile that he can see somebody who's as cold-blooded as Cy and be kind of disdainful and disgusted by him after the things he himself has done. And that's a kind of a relatable place to be. I don't know how many of you have ever felt this way, but you'll see somebody who has a lot of the same personality traits that you yourself have, and you know that, and yet there is something about the way in which those personality traits are shared with the world that feels like it's on the other side of acceptable to you. And it's really difficult to exactly nail down why that is, but you know that person is different from you, and the way in which they are different you do not approve of. And it's a strange thing, and you know that you're being like hypocritical in a way, but you can't help this like gut reaction to what they do or how they carry themselves. So I see that in this episode from Francis a couple of different times, and I just don't know what to make of it. I don't know if I'm actually seeing that or if it's my imagination. Maybe I'm desperate for a reason to give him a break just because I don't like Francis still being here is part of it, you know? So I feel like I want to turn him into somebody that I feel like I can reason with, and that might just not be possible. Who knows? So we have this scene of that ends in this way that I'm not entirely sure what like agreement they come to, because the doc says, I will like look after those girls pro bono. And Sai says, I know what that means. Prove to me that you do. In a moment that makes me just want to go, Sai, who do you think you're talking? You think he doesn't know what pro bono means? The doctor? Are you high? And when the doctor says, I wouldn't charge you anything, the scene ends with Sai saying, here too, let me tolerate a different point of view. And the doctor just walks away, and I assume that the reason that he walks away is because let me tolerate a different point of view is Sai basically being like, I will tolerate the fact that you want to help these girls and not actually like actively encourage or discourage you the way that I'm not actively encouraging or discouraging the, what's the name of the San Francisco Asian guy? There's just something about the way that scene ends that I wasn't really sure what Doc Cochran was like allowed. We see him dealing with these women later in a way that makes me wonder if he actually did have permission or not. This was just sort of left in a place that I didn't really know what the agreement was or what Sai was even really saying. But when the doc walks out, it feels like he purposefully bashes into the back of Wolcott's chair. And I couldn't tell if that was like an accident or not, because Wolcott is definitely, I feel like the arrival of him plus these other women has to be, the correlation has to be in the doc's head. Like he has to know that guy has something to do with it. So then we get to the weird sort of centerpiece in this episode, which is Tom Nuttall's bicycle. This is sort of sweet, and it's, obviously perfect for something called Childish Things. But Tom has this bicycle, a velocipede, as Merrick calls it, that it's one of those classic old bicycles with the really, really giant front wheel that I looked at that shit and was just like, how do you even get on that? With help. That's the answer to that question. And this arrives, it's a huge deal. Everybody's really distracted by it, and stopping in the street to see it because it's the only one in town. And, folks haven't even seen anyone ride one before, clearly. And then it turns into this huge bet, which is like a main event later on in the episode. And it's a great moment. I really love when this show manages to bring everyone together for weird little things like this. And when I say like this, I mean moments in the street that everybody gets to be privy to, whether that be something as sort of innocent and lovely as a bicycle ride, or somebody beating the shit out of somebody else and everybody getting to see it. But there's just something about there being this main event in the middle of the thoroughfare, and then the camera, like, you know, panning around and catching the varied reactions and expressions of all of these different characters that we've gotten to know. I find that really satisfying, and to be a sort of like heartwarming moment, even when whatever's going on in the street is not heartwarming. It's just something, there's something about the group experience and knowing how closely all of these people are linked together when it comes right down to it, because of where they live and who they know, that there's something about that I find weirdly like poetic and beautiful. So yeah, Tom Nuttall, he's like showing this thing off in his bar. And at one point, the, like subject of whether or not he'll be able to like roll over sinkholes and what they call the quagmire, which is like the main part of the thoroughfare that's always just full of mud and whatnot. And they start to take bets, and he is positive that he's going to make it across. I have to be perfectly honest. I never thought in a million years he would make it across. He's up like 10 feet in the air riding this thing, first of all. So it's really top heavy. There's no tire on it. It's just a band of metal. Basically, you're riding on your rim. And the thoroughfare is like one of the most uneven, like, dangerous places to walk, even when you're fucking on your own 2 feet. Never mind driving, like, you know. So I honestly expected Tom Nuttall to go ass over tea kettle, as they say, and for there to be a bit of like laughter at his expense. And instead, he actually makes it. And there's this like triumph to it that is really sweet and unexpected. There's no reason that this has to be here. This isn't part of like the overall plot that Tom Nuttall got a bicycle, but it's this lovely sort of aside moment that is just for the sake of it. And it's things like that that I think are really important to establishing people are living their lives here. This is a place that is going to be home for a lot of people in the future. And just doing the occasional fun and beautiful thing for the sake of doing something beautiful and fun is really, really important. You know, it's not all about survival. It's not all about drinking. It's not all about gold or women or whatever. Sometimes we just want to play and be kids, and that's fine. And we find ways to do that as adults, you know? So the whole like scene, we get all of these, you know, Al's watching, and he's obviously like invested. He's cheering and yelling. We have even got Seth's wife, Martha, and his son watching and like getting excited about it. Even Woolcut is standing off to the side and like, it seems despite himself, getting excited about it also. Like he gets this smile on his face, and I can't help. If I looked back at these previous episodes, I feel like that would be the only time we've ever seen him actually crack a real smile that wasn't motivated by him needing to get a job done. So I just loved this whole like subplot and scene, and all of this was so good to me. So I'm talking about confrontations. This one isn't exactly a confrontation, but Al gets Miss Isringhausen and sits down with her to talk to her about what's going on. As he's like waiting for her, we have a brief thing of this guy who is meeting with Merrick. He just came into town on the same stagecoach as the bicycle, and his name is Blazanov, and he is going to be the telegraph operator. This guy has a hell of a fucking mustache, and this whole vibe that I'm having a really tough time getting a handle on. I don't really know what his deal is yet, but Merrick is obviously excited to have somebody who is sort of technologically minded in town, and who is going to be working out of the same office and keeping him company. And Blazanov is the way that he says it, There's a scene later where Al is sort of trying to bribe him, and I can't tell how open Blazanov is. I'm going to just call him Blazanov. To this arrangement, it feels like Merrick wants to be sort of like Seth and stay above all of that. But I don't feel like Merrick appreciates the position that he's in. I understand wanting to be independent press, not, aligned with anybody, because that undermines anything you write if that gets out, if people start to assume that you're in for somebody. And it also, will fetter what he's allowed to print. And he doesn't care for that either. On the other hand, I wish that he could see there isn't a lot of choice here. Like, it's either align with this person who is offering to help you, or leave yourself vulnerable to Sai again, who showed he had no compunction whatsoever to destroying your shit, and deal with rebuilding over and over again every time you piss him off, which if you want to do that, more power to you. But I feel like you're going to reach a point where you just end up dead, right? Like, it's not about rebuilding after a point. So, we'll get to that. Let's talk about, because the talk with, Al and Isringhausen happens a little bit later after this conversation, which is why it leads to, and why it happens the way that it does, why certain other things happen the way they do. Okay, so this fucking scene. Martha goes to see Alma. Now, I've been waiting for something like this. But this was so much more uncomfortable than I expected. And there are so many reasons why. First of all, Martha seems, and it's like she knows that Alma is pregnant, but I do not know where she got her information. Because as far as I know, Martha doesn't have any real friends in the camp. And the only people that I think are aware that she's pregnant are Ellsworth and Saul. And Ellsworth's not talking to anybody about this. And Saul told Seth, and that's it, right? So I don't know if she has just started to piece together that something is going on, or however she is figuring this out. Martha is a smart fucking cookie, man. She cottoned on to the vibe in the room when she first arrived and knows that there is something going on between them. And when Seth is in a bad mood and starts to act weird, she can put it together that there's something going on, and it feels like is doing her own sleuthing that we don't really get to see on the show and piecing it all together. So she arrives at Alma's, and I really expected this to be about what's going on with Seth. And I don't know what I thought she would actually say about it. I was just sort of assuming it had to do with that. Then I started to be like, well, no, maybe it's about her son having somebody to play with and hanging out with Sophia. But it becomes clear what she's here to ask for Alma's blessing in taking the place of the school teacher who fled the camp. And we saw her coming with, being introduced to the camp, led around by Merrick. And when he said she fled, I thought Merrick meant she, went back to her rooms and didn't want to, be near me for the rest of the night. But he meant from camp. This school teacher just, at the first sign of trouble was like, oh, this is not where I'm going to be. And on the one hand, I kind of respect that she knows that and is just like, yeah, this isn't for me, and decided to find something better pretty quickly. But on the other hand, I'm like, all it took was a busted up print shop. And granted, some shit on the floor. She didn't know it was human shit. But that's all it took, and she's ready to just completely bail. That's pretty intense. I guess I assume that a lot of places are as rough as it is here, but I guess not. I don't know where she's from. I don't remember. But it doesn't matter. She's gone, and Martha is wanting to take her place because she thinks that she could be a decent teacher. Now, this is the part that I find really puzzling. She suggests this, and Alma looks like she has no idea how to react, and she gets up and walks away to work on lighting the fire so that she can boil some water for tea, which she has already offered, even though she doesn't have it ready. And Martha has already accepted and said, "Oh, I would love some." I do not understand Alma's reaction here. She behaves as if Alma saying that she wants to be the school teacher is Alma basically coming up to her and being like, "Stay away from my man." There's this look on Alma's face. Like, I don't understand it. All Martha's saying is, I think that I would be a good teacher, and I thought that I could take on that role in the camp. That's all. And Alma looks like she wants to slap her and is like restraining herself and hustling off to deal with the fire instead to calm down. And I don't understand it. Why is that so, like, upsetting to her? And she's trying to light this fire. She can't even manage the matches. Like, her hands are shaking. Again, there is clearly some subtext here that I am not picking up. And finally, Martha says, "Don't worry about the tea if it's too much trouble." And Alma says, "Well, if I had noticed that you were coming, I would have been prepared." And at this point, the gloves basically come off. Like, they have lace gloves underneath their boxing gloves, and those stay on. But these women don't ever really quite say what they're meaning. What Martha says next is, "Well, it seems like I always take you unaware, don't I? Like, basically, you didn't know I was coming last time." And Alma says, "Well, as you previously mentioned, simple courtesy could have forestalled that." As if she doesn't know exactly what the fuck Martha is talking about right here. And Martha throws back in her face, "What simple courtesy could have prevented my taking you unaware the last time? What simple courtesy of mine?" Like, basically being like, "Bitch, I am not at fault for the fact that I came up on you practically in the middle of fucking my husband. This is not my fault." And Alma sort of tries to change the subject back and be like, "So you want to take on care of Sophia as well?" And Martha says, "As well as whom?" To which Alma replies, "As well as your own son. Who else do you think I mean?" And the scene ends there. It cuts away. We don't actually get to see, like, it's a weird moment. And again, it feels like what Alma is saying and what Martha are saying is that Martha's offering to be the school teacher is putting her in a position to, like, raise Seth's child. But the thing is, like, a school teacher doesn't just take a baby, does she? Like, in this era, you aren't sent to school until you're at least, like, I would think 5 or 6 years old. So this reaction that Alma's having, that Seth's wife is sort of offering to, like, take her child away, doesn't and this is one of those things where I feel like maybe the context of the era would help me if I knew that, yeah, a school teacher would also be kind of like a nanny and look after babies as well. If I understood more that was what she was offering, then maybe that would change the meaning of some of what she's saying here. but I don't really feel that that's what's going on. So a lot of Alma's reaction is just a mystery to me. And it doesn't feel like Martha is prepared for this reaction really either. When she offers to be the school teacher, she does so with what feels like a genuine smile and anticipation on her face. And it isn't until Alma stands up and walks away from her that she starts to sense something is really wrong. I'm thinking she went to Alma with pure intentions, and it's Alma's reaction to everything that gives away that she's pregnant. I think. But guys, I'm just kind of baffled by this scene. So if anyone has like some insight into why this went the way that it went, I would really appreciate it, because I want like this confrontation between the two of them. I'm really here for it. And they're both such great actresses. Oh my God. But I just didn't really understand or follow why things progress in the way that they did. And this results in, because like I said, the scene like just ends after she says, "Whom else did you think I meant?" And Martha just stares like sort of open-mouthed as if she can't believe Alma's like nerve. And then when it ends, we're with Alma again a little bit later, and she's obviously still very, very agitated from this encounter and needs to take out her irritation on somebody. And she goes and visits Miss Isringhausen and tries to take out her frustration on her and tries to basically be like, "I know you're up to something," without showing her hand that Al came to her and informed her of what's going on. But basically, she picked the wrong one. She's over here trying to start some shit because she doesn't know exactly what Miss Isringhausen is made of. And she is shown pretty fucking quickly that this bitch is not here to play. I was being nice before and handled everything the way I am supposed to handle it. But now I'm on to phase 2, and you are not part of this. And you like, she tries to hit Isringhausen, and bitch grabs her wrist mid-strike, and it's just like, no, that's not who I am. I know you thought you knew who I am, but surprise, bitch, you don't. And also, you're not ready. And I was just like, here for this shit. I swear to God, you guys, this scene, it's so creepy. And I really like Alma. Don't get me wrong. I still really like Alma. She can be a huge bitch. She can be a giant snob. But I still really enjoy her as a character. And yet, seeing her thrown so completely off by somebody whom she did see as her inferior is pretty satisfying. You know, it's a different, like, this has been done in a different way with Trixie, like calling her out for, you know, her shitty behavior and all of that. However, I really did like this being a physical kind of confrontation, because that's so obviously what Alma wants. Like, she is vibrating with anger and rage and to a degree, I think, fear. And she needs a physical outlet for that. And women were not given anything to do that was like strenuous that could give you an outlet. So coming to this other woman to slap her in the face is about as good as it's going to get for her in that regard. And yeah, it does not work out. So Isringhausen finally just says, "You've had your fit of temper, now get back to your fucking room." And Alma goes back to her fucking room, spoiler alert, and it's like, again, I keep going back to this title being Childish Things, but it's a very good choice, because throughout this episode there are moments like this, like she's being sent to her room by the woman who's actually in charge of this situation. You know, it's a very like weird sort of matriarchal moment, but backward. So yeah, this, I'm going to jump ahead and just finish off what's going on with Martha, because she has a blow up with Seth. He comes home, like, there's a scene earlier where he comes home for lunch, and Martha basically is like hinting, I know that woman, her husband died and she was all alone in the camp, and that somebody with your sensibilities would probably have a lot of sympathy for her. And essentially tries to put it out there, I know that you've fucked her. And we don't get whether or not she's pregnant from Martha here. Like, I assume Martha knows, but it's just a really strained scene. But then when they meet up later, it's different. Like, Martha has clearly had time to think and has decided that she is not here for this shit at all. So she walks up to Seth and she can barely even look at him. And she says, this roof over our heads, Mr. Bullock, testifies to your care for William and me. The fostering affection and guidance you show my son to shape him into a man will only deepen my gratitude to you. As for myself, and she's like crying here, no further demonstrations are necessary, as other duties claim your attentions. And he says, he doesn't deny that this happened. He simply says, none such as you conceive since your arrival, nor will they again, whatever the state of our relations. And she says, do not sacrifice further on my account, Mr. Bullock. And starts to walk away up the stairs and rethinks and comes back and says, I reject the offering. I repudiate it. I find it poisonous. Which is pretty fucking intense wording. I find it poisonous. And walks away. And that's a really interesting way to say that. I find your sacrifice poisonous. Basically, you really think you're doing me a fucking favor by not fucking this other woman while I'm around in town? This isn't about me. Don't you dare make it about me. I'm not grateful to you for it. And I'm not going to pretend that I'm grateful to you or that you're doing something fucking noble. And I gotta respect that. You know what? Like, I understand completely where Seth is coming from, where, you know, he married her out of duty and he doesn't feel the way about her that he does about Alma. And there is a certain amount of understanding in her, I'm sure, as well. But how publicly he carried out this affair, I think, is probably part of what's playing into it with Martha now, because retroactively, I'm sure she's putting the pieces together in her mind of what the scene was like when she came into camp and how awkward everyone was being. So she must be starting to realize the whole town knows. And if indeed she has figured out that Alma is pregnant, then it's going to be like she's going to be living here in this town with everybody knowing that her husband impregnated this other woman. Like, there's no good outlet for her here that leaves her not being humiliated. So even if he stops fucking her, like, the damage is done. It's too fucking late now. And obviously one can say, well, Martha has to understand that he's in a position where he's doing his duty and has to understand that he doesn't, like, really care about her in that way. But the thing is, guys, that you can understand that and also be in that exact same situation yourself. She doesn't want to marry Seth either, I don't think. Like, she doesn't love him, obviously. There's not, like, that kind of chemistry between the two of them. And there's nothing about the way that she looks at him that makes you think that she's pining away and just wishing that he loved her the way that she loves him. This is very much also expedient and practical for her. But she doesn't get the option to ease the wounds of marriage of practicality by going and having an affair with somebody that she actually loves and cares about. The man that she actually loved and cared about is fucking dead. You know, like, and it's just, it has got to feel deeply unfair to her that Seth is carrying on like this and she hasn't got anybody. And he did this allegedly to assist her, and it's going to result in her being just seen as this like joke, you know? So I really feel for Martha, and I don't think she's handling this in like the exact right. Like I wouldn't handle it this way, but I also have a lot of sympathy for it. You know, I really get where she's coming from and how frustrated she must be and how much it feels like a dead end here. You know, like she doesn't have a lot of options. She doesn't get to just leave. I mean, I guess she could, but like, what would that, like, you know, I don't know. So I just wanted to talk about that because that scene ends with Seth looking really angry and like throwing the poker on the floor. And he had a sort of a confrontation earlier with Saul and tells Saul that he doesn't like the spot that Saul picked out because for the bank, it'll be facing the what do you call it? Hardware store. I kept wanting to say the garage. The bank would be facing the hardware store, and he thinks that perhaps the person who is bankrolling the whole thing won't want to just stare at their hardware store all day. To which Saul's like, I didn't realize that the situation was still that fucking sensitive. And I just can't with how much Seth is being an asshole to Saul. Saul is doing nothing but being like a supportive friend as best he can. And Seth takes out every bit of temper he has on Saul. And I get so fucking irritated with him. So as usual, I'm running behind. So let me speed up some of my little confrontations here. We have this whole thing. There's the subplot with Francis Woolcott and this dude whose brother has part of the claim that Francis is trying to get his hands on. This dude's name, let's see, Mose. That's right, Mose. He owns part of the claim with his brother, Charlie. And he apparently is like, knows for a fact that his brother is not going to sell, not going to be down for it. And his brother is played by a guy who I remember from Community. And he was a carnival worker. And those of you who have seen that show may know who I mean. He was Britta's ex-boyfriend. And it was such a weird episode. So I could not stop laughing in this scene until all of a sudden his brother just fucking kills him. And I was like, oh, okay, that's what we're doing? So yeah, his brother shoots him at the exact moment that the starter pistol goes off out in the thoroughfare. So nobody hears that this even like just happened. And later on, Mose is trying to make this deal with Francis Woolcott, but he is completely torn up over what he did and is not like coping well with it at all. He's not, you know, he killed his own brother for money. It's obvious that this is going to haunt him the rest of his life and that he is going to start to really regret it. And Francis has no patience for this because Francis is doing he's going through a lot of the exact same thing. He is killing people for money or expedience or whatever, but he has enough of a conscience that's fucking with him. So after the like final sort of conversation that he has with Mose and is just getting irritated with how much Mose seems to be shook up by this murder and how much he seems to be like willing to put it out there to everybody that he did this in a pretty obvious way. He like keeps on acting like he's so worried somebody else is going to finger him for this crime. And Woolcott has to be like, nobody else is going to say shit. You're the one out here talking about it. What are you doing? It seems to sort of shake Woolcott up. And he goes to the scene of his crime. Now, this whole thing with Jane getting involved in what's going on with Joni, can I just say, I am here for it. I want more of it. I want them to team up. I feel like Jane being the muscle for an all-women's brothel, a woman-owned brothel, I'm here for it. Can we please do that? Pretty please? Basically, Jane comes in after Charlie catches her vomiting outside his business and is just like, can you please go in and talk to that woman because she's lost a bunch of friends recently? And Jane resists, but then goes ahead. She and Joni have a weird conversation in which Jane is as awkward as ever, but doesn't take a drink. She holds herself back and tries to get a little bit of information out of Joni about what happened. And Joni seems to like be completely at a loss at first, but then grows to sort of appreciate these overtures that Jane is making. And Jane has taken it upon herself to sort of watch over Joan. So she leaves and like passes out, but wakes up a little bit later and is really mad at herself. And it's just like, I was supposed to be fucking watching her. I can't believe I did this. And is heading over there. Meanwhile, Francis Wolcott is already there and he comes in and Joni is just sitting there waiting for him and tells him, do what you came to fucking do. And he's like, I don't even really know what I came to do, to be honest. And she is rigid and obviously incredibly tense, expecting to die. And then all of a sudden, it seems like she realizes that she's doing the same thing that Maddie did, where she's like just waiting for death in a way. And it suddenly comes over her that she's not going to fucking just sit here and wait for somebody to kill her, especially this fucking guy. And I appreciated this sudden change in mindset from her, because it's one thing to think that you've resigned yourself to death, but I would think that a lot of us, we would think we've sort of like achieved that equilibrium, and then in the moment we're like, never mind. So he, is just trying to talk about the bourbon that she's got out because it's like his favorite and all this stuff. And finally, she picks up the bottle and just bashes him on the side of the head with it and says, leave me alone, and runs into the next room and closes it and says, I've got a fucking gun in here too. And she does. She's not lying. And she says, and get the fuck out. And lock the front fucking door. And I think for him, this is enough to call it quits for him. I think not quits like he's leaving the camp. I mean, he thinks that they are even. She got to bash him upside the head and draw blood and really knock the fuck out of him. And he really wants to pay penance for what he did. And I think he counts this. And that he thinks like, all right, I got what I wanted and I'm done here and I'm not going to hurt you either. And he runs into Jane as he's leaving. And Jane is like, what the fuck were you doing in there? Like, obviously very concerned about this. And he tells her that woman is fine. This is my name. This is where I'm staying. If you want to come at me later on because you think I lied. And she asks who runs the hotel. And he says a grotesque named Barnum. Or Farnham. And she sort of thinks to herself, well, he's not lying so far, which I thought was really funny. That was a good line. So I'm just hopeful that Joni can get on with her life now and that Francis will just leave her the fuck alone. I really want him to just leave her the fuck alone. Guy, just move on with your life and let's all just pretend that none of this ever happened, please. Thank you. So the other thing that I haven't really talked about, we have a brief thing with Al Swearingen having that native head in a box that he talks to. I'm not really going to get into that here, but it's super weird, especially when he decides that he's going to open it. I don't really know what to make of that, but okay. But then, guys, Ellsworth proposes to fucking Alma, and she doesn't reject him outright. She asks for some time to consider. And I have to be honest, I really hope she marries him. It'll add such a weird dynamic to everything. I am here for this weirdness. You know, like, I don't know what that will look like, but the whole way that he handled it and the whole way that she seems to really appreciate what he is trying to do for her, I love it. And I want so much for this to, like, actually work out. I feel like this will save her a lot of heartache. Maybe it'll, like, do something in terms of repairing what's going on to between Seth and his wife, which, you know, I like Martha enough that I would like for that to work out. So yeah, that's that. And I'm just on tenterhooks waiting to see what winds up happening there. Well, that's about everything this episode. So yeah, this is a good one though. So thank you again, Patrick, for commissioning this. Really appreciate it. Hope you guys are all enjoying this coverage. Very excited that I'm going to be able to watch the movie along with everybody else once it's out. Very excited. And yeah, we'll see you guys all again soon with a new episode. Till then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.